are talking Satanic Hispanics from 2022. And this is an anthology movie consisting of a wraparound and 4 individual stories. Now, the crux of this one is they all kind of are directed by Hispanic directors and either take place in places like Mexico or feature, a large amount of Hispanic cast members, or are about a kind of like subject matter that which is conducive to the culture. So I will go on record by saying I am not the biggest fan of anthology films, to be honest. I find the kind of the short run time of the stories doesn't really give you time to build much sort of characters, and we all know that they all try to be kind of like, oh, let's have this kind of fun twist and everything, and it's just like sometimes I feel they could be a little bit by the numbers. But let's talk about this one. So we have this wraparound story where this guy is picked up by the police after a seemingly a massacre by the cartel, and he's the only survivor, and he's being questioned by the police. One of the police being played by the kind of the only recognisable face for me, Greg Grunberg, and he effectively this prisoner says he's immortal, and he's kind of running away from this kind of entity. And as such, he's kind of telling the kind of police these various kind of stories that are all to do with his belongings. And we'll circle back to the kind of the wraparound story, but let's talk about the 4 individual stories first of all. The first one is about this guy who seemingly kind of lives alone and is preparing for a Rubik's Cube tournament. And but he seems to have unwittingly discovered, doing these kind of practicing for this Rubik's Cube, a way to peek into the other side, peek behind the veil, so to speak. And he kind of gets this kind of like podcast to come out and sort of witness this kind of phenomena, shall we say. And he does this by doing various kind of like hand movements and with lights and stuff that he's kind of learned through doing the Rubik's Cube. So this one, I think is a slower burn, kind of short, if you can have such a thing. I mean, while I was watching this, I actually even forgot it was kind of really a horror, to be honest, because it kind of takes its time to kind of really kind of get going. It's lots of sort of family drama, really, and it's played in a very kind of straight, in a dramatic fashion. So you almost forget that you're watching like a horror film to a degree, but it does give it a degree of gravitas to be honest. Now with this one, it's kind of just like this weird mystery that we kind of find, and it sort of ends without really kind of I would say explaining a whole lot, but I still found the premise quite chilling. This is, out of all of them, the one which I would say is the scariest, if you want to say that, because it's kind of quite creepy. We don't really know what we're looking at. I think some of the subtlety involved here does make it for the more creepy of all these sort of stories. And there is some interesting kind of imagery here. There is a little bit of gore in this one. As I would say, on the negative side, there are some VFX here that do look a bit wonky. They do use practical effects on this one. And there are some sequences where I think it looks rather rubbery, shall we say. But there are sequences where I do think it works at the same time. Maybe this one could have used a little bit more story development, but I think for just kind of a little taste of spookiness, this one works quite well. I thought the acting was relatively good in this one, kind of quite dramatic, as I say. And it's all kind of in the dark, and it looks quite kind of moody. So I kind of quite like this one. The second one is like a pure comedy. It's about this vampire who's out on Halloween, but he kind of gets caught out a little bit longer than he needs to be, and has to try and find cover before sunlight comes. And it's him trying to effectively avoid daybreak, and various kind of comedy hijinks ensue. Now, considering this is a movie where all of these stories are meant to be taking place in the same universe, so to speak, this one feels like quite out of place, although it's not the only one which is kind of leans towards comedy. But this one is almost parody levels, spoof levels. It's kind of quite fun in a weird sort of way. You know, it's kind of like a kind of a joke movie, just kind of seeing this kind of bumbling kind of vampire trying to avoid the police and trying to get out of daylight and things like this, and his powers are used, but you know, he's not particularly kind of great using them. He can't transform into a bat. His mind control kind of powers only work on one person at a time. It's kind of funny, you know, it's kind of like a little bit of a laugh, but it's kind of feels a little bit weird in context when you have it next to the last one, which was kind of deadly serious. So it feels a little bit tonally out of whack if you are wanting to kind of watch this and believe this is kind of all, you know, aspects of the same universe and things like that. So, but it was fine. It was kind of quite fun and as a little bit of a kind of a comedy hijinks, and even a little bit poignant at the very end, so I didn't mind it. The third one to me is by far the weakest, quite considerably. It's shot very well, but it feels like half a story. We have this guy who seems to be working with the CIA, and he's in Mexico, and he's doing something for the CIA, but he comes afoul of this kind of cult, which seemed to be, you know, worshipping nature. They're all covered in dirt and things like that, and ultimately he kind of ends up in the clutches of this kind of witch who wants to sacrifice him. But it's really very little context as to what's actually going on in this kind of short. It feels like there is scenes missing. This feels like this was part of a movie that has just been taken out and plonked in this kind of anthology. It didn't really make any kind of sense. Very, very kind of like confused about what the actual kind of situation is here. You know, like I said, it's shot well, and but this kind of like, they almost feel like pagans in a way. They're kind of worshipping Mother Nature and stuff, but it is a kind of Mexican-based story, you know. I think the VFX as well were a little ropey in this one, so it was kind of quite boring because I wasn't there with the ride on this one. The fourth one goes back to more comedy. It's not quite as a parody as the kind of the vampire one, but we have this guy who has secretly recorded some type of ritual that he shouldn't have done on his phone or on a tape recorder, and now all his friends are kind of dropping dead, and he comes kind of face to face with some type of entity. And the joke here is he's got a weapon to kind of fight back, but the weapon that he's got is maybe something you're not going to expect. You know, again, it's fairly kind of fun, light and breezy. Not a lot in regards to kind of meat on the bones in story. There are some kind of quite good action sequences in this one, actually. And it's fine, but somewhat kind of throwaway. So, you know, only one quite poor story, I would say. The rest are either kind of, you know, fairly watchable or, you know, have good elements in them. And the wraparound story concludes where we have a kind of almost like a scene from the original Terminator, where we have this entity kind of comes into this kind of police station to effectively, you know, chase down this kind of guy who's in being questioned, and he's kind of wrecking up the police, and there's a little bit of a standoff there. A fun little nod to the Terminator with some quite good kind of VFX. But I didn't really see the relevance of all this guy telling all of these cops these stories, because that's the conceit here. It feels to me like they've had these 4 short stories, and then they kind of concocted this kind of wraparound story to try and link them together. But it didn't really feel like it did link them at all. I mean, this guy is telling these cops about these situations, but how it relates to him is kind of, there isn't any link, but he's telling them like it is. So it doesn't really make sense. I mean, like I said, this movie I think is fun in certain areas. I think it's generally kind of quite well made. The production design looks good, and you know, it's generally kind of quite well put together on a kind of a technical level, even the one I didn't really like. And there are some kind of good comedy moments, there are some kind of action sequences, and there's some interesting kind of VFX. So even though I feel this movie is quite uneven, when you kind of add up all the parts, I would say it's probably a slightly better than average kind of anthology movie to a degree, even though to me it didn't quite gel together. I'll give it a 6 out of 10 because I do think there is at least, you know, reasonable craftsmanship in this movie. Have you seen Satanic Hispanics? What did you think of it? Please do leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.